And we have a quorum. This is the Bills Committee of the Inland Revenue Amendment Number 2 Bill 2018. This is the first meeting, so we need to elect a chairman. I now ask members to make valid nomination. It has to be done orally, and it has to be seconded by another member. This nomination will have to be accepted by the person nominated. Mr. Charles Mock, I nominate Mr. Kenneth Leung. Seconded by Mr. Wu Chi-wai. Do you accept Mr. Leung? Yes. I don't think there will be other nominations. We have only one candidate, Mr. Kenneth Leung. Mr. Leung, please come forward. Members, do we need a deputy chairman? Well, if there are no other views, I don't think there is a need to have a deputy. Let's invite the administration to come in to join us.
唔該。嗱，我哋睇睇政府其實發出咗幾份。
There are 3 papers. One is from the Commerce and Economic Development Bureau. Is the legislative brief issued on the 31st of March. Is paper number CITB CR 81/45/2. And the other one is also from the same bureau, dated the 23rd, paper number 860/1718/01. There is also one from the Legislative Secretariat, paper number /03. The legal advisor has, on the 18th of April 2018, sent a letter to the administration. It is the CB /1842/17-18/03. The administration has given us a reply. It was tabled this morning. It's paper number CB /1860/1718/01. So we have with us from the CEDB, Mr. Gary Poon, and also Mr. KK Chiu, Deputy Commissioner of the Inland Revenue Department. From the Department of Justice, we have Mr. Alan Chong, Senior Government Counsel. Also from the CEDB, we have Ms. Alice Choi, Principal Assistant Secretary. We also have Michelle Chong, Assistant Director of Intellectual Property. Ms. Choi from the CEDB, Ms. Maggie Wong from the Intellectual Property Department, and Ms. Fiona Wong is from the Inland Revenue Department. I now ask Mr. Poon to take us through this paper. Thank you. This is the Inland Revenue Amendment Number 2 Bill 2018. This is to extend the profits tax deductions for capital expenditure incurred for the purchase of IPRs in intellectual property rights. Currently, it covers 5 types of rights. They are well, in order to develop Hong Kong into an IPR trading center in Asia Pacific, we have formed a working group with stakeholders as well as expert groups. In 2015, the working group published a report making a number of recommendations. One of them is to extend the tax deductions for capital expenditure incurred for the purchase of IPR. We have accepted the recommendation, and in the budget, the FS, the Financial Secretary, announced that it will be expanded to 8 of them. The additional 3 IPRs are rights in layout, design, topography of integrated circuits, plant varieties, and performances. This is to implement these recommendations. The 3 additional IPRs have their respective ordinances protecting such rights. There is the Layout, Design, Topography of Integrated Circuits Ordinance, Plant Varieties Protection Ordinance, as well as Copyright Ordinance. Tax deduction arrangements will be aligned with existing arrangements. Whether these IPRs are registered, subsists, or protected under local legislation or overseas legislation, they will be afforded protection. Taxpayers will have to meet certain conditions before they can enjoy profits tax deductions. And it also applies to the 3 additional IPRs. If this bill is endorsed, it will cover all major types of IPRs. In relation to the 3 additional IPRs, it will apply from the assessment year after the 1st of April 2018. We hope to encourage enterprises to participate in the development of IPRs to promote Hong Kong as a regional IPR trading center. Well, existing categories of IPRs are copyright, registered design, registered trademarks, patent rights, and rights to know-how. There aren't many members. Currently, there are 4. Mr. Charles Mock. I have a number of questions, very simple ones, just to help us understand. First, in relation to the 3 additional IPRs, can you give us some examples to help us understand what are the possible scenarios that the new proposal will apply? Has there been any reasons, justifications put forward as to why these 3 additional IPRs are to be added? Have you done any assessment as to the value? You mentioned that there are respective legislations covering these IPRs. Have you assessed the values of these tax deductible items in the future? Mr. Poon, as we have said, that under the current IRO, there are already 5 IPRs that enjoys tax deductions for capital expenditure. So currently, major IPRs are covered under these 5 categories. And in 2011, when we had a discussion in relation to these tax deduction arrangements, members asked whether there are any others not covered by these 5 categories. So we have looked into them. For topography, plant varieties, as well as performances, currently there is already a protection regime. And if tax deductions can cover these 3 categories as well, it will be more comprehensive. as to whether we have an assessment of the value involved, it's not something easy to quantify. Unlike patents or trademarks, these are not as common, but they are important categories for an IPR center. I can't give you a simplified, quantified figure, but if these are included, it will be more comprehensive and will also promote Hong Kong as an IPR trading center. Can I ask, apart from these 3 additional types, there are no other categories, right? We have already included all major categories. There may be some others then. I just want to understand what the suggestion was. Just these 3 categories, or there must be a reason. Was the reason that they are major types? These 3 categories are covered by local legislation, so we already have existing definitions and legislation that apply. It will be easier to apply those tax deductions. For other places, there may be some other types of IPRs that applies to their own particular circumstance. Say, for example, the nomenclature of a place, there may be some specific IPR, but currently we have covered all the major categories. Can you tell us more information about the 3 additional IPRs? When were they protected under their respective ordinances? These ordinances have been in place for quite some time. For Plant Varieties Protection Ordinance, it was enacted back in 1990s, so it's been there for quite some time. Has there been any additional IPR categories that are not covered by this bill? As far as I know, no. The scope we propose is in line with the scope of protection of IPRs. Mr. Wu Chi-wei, I think it's Mr. Wong Ting Kwong first. Thank you. Protection of IPR should change with the times. But there are some things I don't understand, so I'd like to ask. When it comes to integrated circuits, the topography, I understand that is something to do with design, some high-tech thing. So an IPR subsists, I understand, but I don't understand when it comes to animals, plants actually, animal varieties. You're talking about animals or plants? Oh, plants then. If there are plant varieties, what about animal varieties?
So let's say I bred a new type of dog. Can I get some patent rights? Will we have animal variety protection in the future? So with plant varieties, let's say I have bred some valuable species and I make it available for trade. And the third area is performance. I understand all literary works, lyrics, and so on. The music, the score itself has copyright. But here we're talking about fixation rights. And on the internet, if you look at YouTube, you see in Tuen Mun, Wong Kok, we have street busking, and they place it on the internet. Do they have copyright? Is it the performer who has the right, or the person who took the video? And that's confusing. So, what are the rights regarding performances? So we have 3 questions, Mr. Poon. Thank you, Mr. Wong. Regarding performance rights, I can have colleagues from IPD elaborate. Coming back to integrated circuits and topography, put simply, it's a computer circuit and there's a design. So if regarding the printed circuit board, if we have some new inventions, of course we can have patents to offer protection. But for different electronic components and how they are laid out on the printed circuit board to allow the board to achieve certain outcomes, that might not be covered by patents. So that's why regarding the IC layout and design, we have the topography protection. Now regarding the plant varieties, our current ordinance deals with certain varieties, all cultivated, including edible plants and vegetables, and these can be covered under the Plant Variety Protection Ordinance. So we want to safeguard the breeders' rights, to encourage more breeding activity and agricultural activity. Just now Mr. Wong asked, if we have plant variety, do we have animal protection rights as well? So regarding the layout design and topography and plant variety, this wasn't developed by Hong Kong. There is the International IP Right Association. They have listed some categories, and we are upgrading our ordinance according to this list. So let me stop here and I'll have my colleague elaborate. Ms. Chong? Well, regarding copyright and performance rights, what is the difference? Just now Mr. Wong asked about literary works. There's copyright. So put simply, copyright protection safeguards the author and the innovator. So the performance rights safeguards the performer. So let's say you have a song, we have the score and the lyric, that is the copyright. We have a performer, the singer. Regarding the performance they provided, they have some rights. So what are these rights? Put simply, they can restrict the reproduction or fixation of the performance, except for home use or individual use. Now Mr. Wong said that they could tape it and allow for self-use. That has not infringed on the performer's rights, but if you have fixated the and reproduce or distribute or sell, then you would have infringed on the economic rights of the performer. So just now I said that the performer has a right. They can tape and fixate the product. They can also authorize a person to reproduce the concert version and make it for sale. So these are the economic rights and the rights that we want to protect. So I hope that simple introduction could answer the question. Well, I want to follow up on the third question. When there are, do these rights cover income, and when there's no income? Yes, when there is a tax deduction, a person, when they assign a product and receive an economic benefit, they can reproduce these fixation products. They can use it as a tax deduction to purchase these rights. And we also want to safeguard the performer. When they perform that work, they had made effort and they need to be compensated. So there has to. So when there's a benefit, this bill will so if there's no economic benefit, there's no financial implication, our bill does not cover that. Then we have separate copyright issues. Can you confirm that? Let me add, we are amending the Inland Revenue Ordinance. So we're not suspending the intellectual protection rights. We are talking about the Inland Revenue Bill here, and people who purchase the IP, they have a capital expenditure, and we want to allow for a tax deduction. So why do we have a tax deduction? It's because when you buy and sell these IP rights, if they give rise to profits or money that's taxable in Hong Kong, then through expanding the tax deduction regime, we want more IP rights to enjoy tax deduction. So coming back to the plant question, I want to know soybeans. We have GM beans, and that involves IP. So if I were in the agricultural sector, I purchase soybeans to grow. There's also assignment of intellectual property. I purchase the soybeans, and these soybeans have GM components, and since that is IP protected, so somebody sells me these beans, and there's an assignment of IP, and I sell them. Do I have to pay taxes? Let me attempt to answer that, and Mr. Chu can supplement. Regarding plant protection, the intellectual property assignment we're talking about, and the capital expenditure or profit that arises out of that, it is the ownership of the plant variety intellectual property. It's not the purchase of the plant itself. So in your example, let's say I developed or I bred a new type of plant and I make it available for sale. We're not talking about that. The tax deduction we're talking about is if I bred a new plant, I own the new species rights, such as its name or the assignment rights. Those are the rights we're talking about. I'll give you another example. Let's say papaya. A lot of papayas are GM, and I can breed them, and I can sell these bred papaya seeds, and of course I receive money. And as a businessman, I need to pay profit tax. But now I take the money that I receive and divide it into two parts. One part is the sale of the papaya trees. Another part is, since I bred a new species of papaya, so I have the IP element, and I suggest that this part is the assignment of IP. That's a profit arising out of assignment of IP. So let's say I sold a batch of papayas for 1 million. 500,000 is for breeding the papaya, and another 500,000 is IP. So in the past, I would have to pay tax on 1 million, and now I'm only only 500,000 is taxable. The other 500,000 is either waived or there's a deduction. So does that give rise to a loophole? I know Mr. Wong is concerned about this issue. Well, one of the conditions is that after R&D there needs to be registration of the IP. Of course, when you come up with a new species, there is cost expenditure, there is actual expenditure. So you need to have these existing conditions, and when you assign a technology, if you just sell a papaya, forget about how you grow it. You have to prove that it's a new technology, a new species, then we have IP. So let's have Mr. Poon elaborate, or Ms. Chong supplement. I will have Mr. Chiu talk about the tax arrangement, but I'll first talk about the plant variety rights. As Chairman said, it has to be registered with the AFCD first, then they can receive protection. So the plant variety rights, the patents they can own, the import, export of the protected species, and the licensing of the above activities. So we're talking about a technology, the patent, not the product itself. So that is where the problem rests. So using papayas as an example, I breed different types of papaya. That is a technology. So when I grow that papaya, that's also a technology. When I sell the seeds and I teach you how to grow them, that is in respect of this new breed that I have created. And as Chairman said, it all has to be registered with the AFCD. It's fully compliant with Hong Kong requirements. In the past, without this Inland Revenue Amendment, then the profits arising would be all taxable under profits tax. I have to pay profit tax. But now we have the new amendment bill, so I have taken the profits and divided into two parts. One part is the taxable part of the product, and the other part is the IP profit. And since IPs are deductible, so we can breed animals just as well as plants. So in other words, this is quite blurry. So after I read the bill, I had a lot of question marks. So let's have Director Chu. Is there a loophole here where there's a extra deduction of capital expenditure? Well, regarding Mr. Wong's, let me use a simple response. IP is intangible property. So if we purchase an IP and receive all the propriety rights, and if we sell the IP, are we saying the IP propriety rights are being assigned wholly?
Using Mr. Wong's example, let's say there is a batch of goods. It's papayas. Well, then it's the sale of stock. Revenue is deductible. But if you're selling IPR, which is capital in nature, it's sold off, and it's not the sale of papayas themselves, but something that is abstract. Once it's sold, you can't charge any royalties for the IPR sold. Neither can you charge license fees. I wasn't talking about papaya, but papaya saplings. Of course, from papaya you can eat it, but papaya sapling, then it is a kind of a tool, and I sold it and I sell it to you. Of course, I sell it off to you, and I can't try to get back these papaya tree after you have grown some papayas. And that's why I don't really understand. Deputy Commissioner. If you want to get the IPR registered, recognized by the law, then it has to be something that is new and has never been commercially exploited. Mr. Wong's example, papaya tree sapling, that itself is not an IPR. IPR is an abstract asset. So papaya tree sapling is no different from papayas, just a different type of goods. Mr. Wong, then I do understand, but I still need some time to take it in. Next, Mr. Wu Chi-wai. I would like to ask this. It's an abstract concept. Well, it's a registered item, and it will be protected and sold after it's registered. So is the sale and purchase of something registered. If I just add two resistors in the integrated circuits, I can't enjoy the tax deductions. Well, even if I add something to it to make it something different, I will have to register it before I can claim tax deductions. Is that right? Deputy Commissioner, the understanding of the Inland Revenue Department is that IPs will have to go through legal registration process, and it is a kind of a property. Under this bill, if a taxpayer makes chargeable profits, if there is a purchase of IPRs, it is a capital expenditure and is tax deductible. So it's nothing to do with valuation, because it's a registered IPR with a value. If you sell it, then you lose the IPR protection. Or if you sell it, you just sell the right to use. Well, you can buy the IPR, or you can buy the right to use. And the revenue generated will be different. We can hear from Ms. Chong of the IP, of the Intellectual Property Department. There are two different arrangements. One that you have to register first before it's recognized. Say, for example, patent. If I invent something and if I don't register it, then it is not protected. Trademark, if I don't register it, it's not protected. However, there are other IP that subsists without registration. Say, for example, copyright. I've written a book. Copyright belongs to the author. So there are two different arrangements. When it comes to registration of IPRs, from the department's perspective, we look to see if it is something that is new. It's nothing to do with value. Value comes into play when there is a transaction because it involves a capital expenditure. Then it involves the IRO. Let's see if my colleagues have anything to add. Ms. Chong? Chairman, your understanding is right. There are two different arrangements. You sell it off, or you buy it off, or you just buy the right to use, which is a license or royalty. For buying it off, under this bill is the core element of the proposed tax deduction. So this time we're talking about buying it off someone and not just the right to use. Mr. Poon, can you confirm that? Deputy Secretary. Well, it's Deputy Commissioner. It is the capital expenditure of the purchase of 3 additional IPRs. If it is just done by license, it's already tax deductible under current arrangements of the IRO. Mr. Wu. So this under this bill is to buy it off someone. So you take the ownership. Say A is the inventor, is registered, and I sell it to B. And if A wants to manufacture, then A will have to buy it back from B. Is that right? Yes. Next, Mr. Porter. This bill is not to encourage development of IPRs because you only offer them tax deductions. Well, capital expenditure is tax deductible, but now capital revenue is, or capital receipt is not tax deductible. In paragraph 3 of the legal brief, sometimes you use the term registration expenditure. Sometimes you use purchase cost. I understand that sometimes a sum is developed by oneself, say for example designs, patents, plant varieties. Well, copyright doesn't involve registration, I understand. So when do you choose registration? When do you choose purchase cost? Sometimes they are interchangeable. If you develop something from scratch, you can use your just daily cost as a tax deduction. Why can't you consider it as part of the development cost? Why do you separate it? I can see from the preamble, plant variety rights, you're talking about purchase. Well, there's also the performance right as well as topography. But grants is a different thing. So what is your line of thinking? When is purchase cost? When is it the acquisition of plant variety cost? Well, when it comes to registration expenditure and purchase cost, we cover both. Under this bill, we aim to expand the scope of tax deductions for capital expenditure from 5 types to 8. So when it comes to purchase cost, it applies to every type. Mr. Zhe mentioned about registration cost. There is a tax deduction. It's a different type of deduction. In answer to a previous question, I said that for some rights, registration is required. For the 3 additional IPRs, plant varieties is covered by a registration system, so there is registration cost. That's why we have to have an additional provision to expand it to cover registration cost. And that's why sometimes we use purchase cost and sometimes registration cost, because we're talking about 2 different sums that is covered by this bill. Tax receipt. I will defer to Mr. Chiu, Deputy Commissioner. This is about the acquisition of 3 additional IPRs and the purchase price. These purchase may be capital in nature, but they are still tax deductible. Registration cost is about the first time when the IPR is recognized by the law and is tax deductible. Mr. Zhe, I fully understand. I already said that there are 2 different types. One requires registration. But what I don't understand is this. How come registration is not considered part of the development cost? My first question wasn't answered. This bill is not just making capital expenditure tax deductible. Capital receipt in the past was not tax deductible, and now it is not. There are some provisions in relation to charge. They are revenue in nature, mainly about royalty. If it's not made clear in provisions, basically they still are chargeable. So if I sell an IPR off in the past, it was capital receipt and it's not chargeable. Well, on one hand, this time if you buy it, you don't have to pay tax, but if you sell it, you do. Well, when you acquire it, it's tax deductible. If you sell it, unless there is a trade-in stock, it's a capital asset, so it's not chargeable. How come in the last paragraph of the legislative brief, paragraph 14, it says it's deemed as trading receipt and it's chargeable even for non-residents? Is there a change of policy?
In the past, the seller did not need to pay tax, but now they need to pay tax. Could you give us a history of the bill, Mr. Chiu? Well, the amendment bill, Clause 3, in Clause 15, what are we talking about? We are talking about IP, the royalties that arise out of that. It is not about the sale of capital items and therefore being taxable. So I want to emphasize that under existing tax regime, the sale of capital assets is not taxable. The amendment is just adding 3 new IPs. It says that if you have royalties, that is taxable. But this amendment just clarifies it. It is not a new addition of tax revenue. Let me digest that and follow up later. Mr. Junius Ho, Chairman, I basically support the tax regime the arrangement of having a tax deduction for these new 3 types of IP. I'm only worried that some issues have been exaggerated, so I'd like to clarify that. So let's say that a person has a plant variety, whether it be soybeans or papayas. Let's say it's a natural soybean, that's the original. That has not been genetically modified. So that is, we have the natural soybean. So from the original state, we convert it to species A. So from O to A, they have invested a lot of capital. And now I have species A, and I register that with that. I receive a patent. Let's say I invested 300 million. So 300 million in going from original soybeans to soybean A, and that is my capital expenditure. I accept that. But let's say I did not start with the original soybean. I had to purchase that. And going from O1 in a certain country, O2, we have another soybean species and a third species, and I take the original 3 different species and I convert it into type A. So when I purchase the O1, O2, O3, so who says that there's proprietary rights that can be assigned? But these are natural. But I'm worried that in the future, when I seek tax deductions, I paid a hefty price for O1. It is 200 million, and then I purchase O2 for another 400 million, and so on. So the basic acquisition price for O1, O2, O3, it's added all together. And then I develop from O1, 2, 3, and I get to product A. How do you define the acquisition costs of the soybeans or papaya? And how do you clarify the research and development costs? So if we allow that acquisition cost of 01, 2, 3, if it's deductible, and in fact nobody can claim a patent of that except for God, then you purchase the bean, it's not even worth a penny. But then you can say I spent 200 million US to purchase the bean 01 from the US. So I'm proposing this loophole here for your consideration, and perhaps Ms. Chong. Well, Mr. Ho, first I need to clarify that all deductions have to be evidence-based. So let's have Mr. Poon, and then we'll have Mr. Chu, and then Ms. Chong. Thank you for the question. Well, there are 2 aspects. What rights are deductible? That's the first question. And if they are tax deductible, how much is it worth? That's the second question. So I'll deal with the first question, and the second question Mr. Chiu will have to help out. So regarding plant variety rights, anybody who produces a plant and says I have the plant variety rights and therefore is tax deductible, that's not the case. because we have limited the tax deductible range to registered plant variety products. That means in Hong Kong or other jurisdictions, they have to be registered. And of course, we rely on the authority that vets the plant variety, and it's not directly related to the tax deduction. It's more about the IP registration. Oh, that's the first question. So, Mr. Ho, you can rest assured the tax deduction arrangement, it won't be that somebody can produce a product and claim a tax deduction. So Mr. Ho can rest assured on this. The second question about the value, Mr. Chiu could help out. Thank you, Chairman. Let me supplement the Secretary's response. So Mr. Ho's example, the Inland Revenue Department will have to look at the different stages. So as Mr. Ho pointed out, I purchased 01, 02, 03, and then I conducted R&D and created a new species. So currently, the bill we're looking at, we're talking about purchasing of 01, 02, 03, and the cost that has been expended, and that can be deducted tax-wise. And the second part is R&D. And last Friday there was a new Inland Revenue bill that had been gazetted that was about R&D. That's number 3, and not today's bill. So to follow up on the Secretary's response, the first part was about, as Chairman said, it has to be evidence-based, and the Secretary pointed out that you have to go through a legal procedure. The plant species has to be registered. That's the first, and then the second part is evaluation. So if you have independent transaction, we have an arm's length principle, and we have to see whether that is reasonable. If it is a related transaction, then we have to look at the transfer pricing mechanisms. And another issue arising is that the whole arrangement, if it's for tax evasion, tax avoiding, then we have to refer to tax avoidance clauses. And I thank Mr. Ho for reminding the law enforcement authorities we have to be careful with these cases. Now, overseas experience has given us a reminder that the transfer or the assignment of IP can sometimes be involved in tax avoidance, and we need to be careful. Yes, I deliberately gave you that example. The director is up to speed. He's very experienced. So we do have the basic acquisition price, whether it is a reasonable valuation, is it a sham or is it an arm's length transaction? If it's not a sham, and I'll name names, Monsanto's in East Germany, they purchased soybeans, they purchased the propriety rights, and then in the U.S. they made a very resilient soybean and had more a high volume of oil, and then they resold this soybean to the Northeast. In the U.S. they have a very peculiar system. When they purchase the East German soybean, it's a natural DNA 01. They purchase the propriety rights. Well, how can you purchase a natural DNA? It cannot be assigned and transferred. So even though I purchased it from a northeastern farmer, the farmer did not create the DNA. It was made by God. So they claim that they paid hundreds of millions for the propriety rights, but in fact it was an arm's length transaction. It's bogus. It's not a tenable position. It was legally untenable, but they, in the US, they claim that they purchased the proprietary rights, and they invested extra R&D costs, and now they call that the soybean type A. And when they come to register in Hong Kong, I'm using this example, and they say that they spent so much, and there was a base price, acquisition price, and use that for tax deduction. So I point that out, even it is whether it's an arm's length transaction or not, or whether they could purchase the propriety rights. I think Section 15 that deals with plant varieties, capital deduction, I think the IRD needs to be very vigilant to. They cannot purchase these proprietary rights. They were willing to pay extra money for that. So this case has already occurred, and I just want to point out that because you came up with a type A soybean and you claim to have purchased the proprietary rights to the natural soybean, we cannot allow that. We have to pay attention to that. I'm aware of this soybean incident. Do we have any response? Let me answer. That is a very good example, but I'd like Mr. Ho to rest assured that I have to admit that I'm not clear about the details of the case, but when IRD enforces the law, we do have experience where there are restrictive covenants between businessmen. They are prohibited from manufacturing certain products. So these costs, this is not the cost in purchasing IP. So even if you prohibit people from certain commercial behavior, that is not necessarily a tax deductible. It could be a capital expenditure. Any follow-up, Mr. Ho? Well, I hope you take note of that, and the IRD maintains vigilance and do not allow this to sneak in and enjoy tax benefits. Well, I don't think IRD will ever allow things to sneak in. So, anybody else with questions, you can raise your hand. Mr. James Mock. Well, I think it's getting clear now. It's rights that are registered. We're not talking about a product. If there's sufficient value, it's a capital expenditure. I just want to clarify one or 2 points that the registration in the 3 scenarios, is it registration of a patent or other type of registration, with the exception of the performance right? Let me answer that part. In the plant variety, there is a registration need. They have their own ordinance and regime. That is just a plant variety. It's not a patent. There are two different regimes, and regarding the performance rights, that it does not involve registration. As I said just now, our IP has 2 types. There's a registration and non-registration regime. That is in line with international practice. And the other area is the ICs. That does not need to, there is no registration mechanism. It's like copyright.
Yes. What about rights of performances? Like you said, using the example of Beatles. Rights of all albums are sold to another company. Is it the transaction you were talking about? It is the right to reproduce. What about the songwriter and the lyric writer? They are not covered. Well, those are copyrights, and they have been covered by existing legislation. There is no breakdown of the amount under the IRD, is that right? That is similar transactions in the past. For the 3 additional IPR tax deductions, well, they were not tax deductible in the past. You haven't got the figure of a tax collected under those 3 categories, is that right? I don't think you can say it like that. Well, currently it is not tax deductible, so I don't know what will be the tax foregone in the future. What do you mean? I don't understand. Chairman, when I said that, well, they are not tax deductible, but it doesn't mean that they pay tax. I mean that they could not deduct it from the operating cost. That's why there is no separate figure. So there is no figure. Doesn't mean that there is it's not collected. It is capital receipt is not chargeable. I am not going to answer on behalf of the IRD, but it is capital in nature, so it is not chargeable. I think it is capital receipt. Deputy Commissioner, the chairman is right. It is capital receipt, so it is not chargeable. For the 3 additional IPRs, it might be tax expenditure, but still, currently it is not tax deductible. There are 5 types of IPRs that are tax deductible currently. In relation to the total amount, it is $846 million. Any other members? Mr. Wu Chi-wai? Well, for purchase is tax deductible. Purchase cost is tax deductible, so is registration. Well, there is another one that is R&D development. For registration, I think you're talking about the very first time. And it's related to R&D. How come it is not included? Wouldn't it be clearer? That is making it tax deductible at the time of purchase. So for registration of the R&D, is it tax deductible? Thank you, Mr. Wu, for the question. Under IR Amendment number 3, R&D expenditure. Well, the concept involves a beginning and an end. A group of scientists or engineers will conceive an idea, and then the process ends just before manufacturing, because afterwards it will be a process of manufacturing. In the middle there is experimentation. I would like to say that R&D can generate IPR, or it may not. If there is IPR generated And if the company wants to protect themselves and register the IPR, then there will be registration cost incurred. It will be expenditure under Section 16(1)(g). Under the definition of R&D doesn't cover registration cost, so you deliberately separate the two. Well, this is clearer. So in the end, for R&D, you will have to register. It will be clearer if you include it as well. If there is a tax deduction for R&D, if you include it there, it will be more attractive. Any other questions? Let me give you an example. A company spends 5 years on something, and they have used on R&D $1 million, and then $200,000 on the registration of the item. So the company owns the IPR, whether it is an integrated circuit or patent, and the IPR is not sold. The company goes into manufacturing. Products are sold. So there is no transfer of IPR, just the sale of product. So assuming it is a Hong Kong company, for the $1 million and the $200,000, when will it enjoy tax deduction? If it doesn't involve any transfer of IPR. Can I ask the Deputy Commissioner to explain to us? See if I understand you correctly. There is a company that spends 5 years on R&D and spent $1 million. An IPR is generated. The IPR is kept by the company. They spend $200,000 on registration, and the IPR is used for manufacturing. So for R&D expenditure over the 5 years, under the new bill, they are tax deductible. We use the term when it's paid and incurred, then it is tax deductible. Section 3 of the new bill provides for enhanced deductions. Since it is an IPR developed by them, there is no purchase involved. So this very bill does not apply to this example. For products manufactured, then they are stocks. The expenditure incurred for the sale of the stock is tax deductible, and receipts are not. You have to meet certain criteria before you can enjoy the tax deduction. For the $200,000, if the company continues to own the IPR, then they can't have a tax deduction of the $200,000. They do enjoy the tax deduction of $200,000. Mr. Mok, do you have any other questions? Well, I don't have any other questions, but I would like to deal with another matter. The proposed amendment. What consultations has the administration done, and what is the response? Shall we hear from the Deputy Secretary? In 2011, when we expand the scope of tax deduction, members asked if the scope can be further expanded. The working group on the expansion of scope of IPR covers relevant parties as well as IPR experts. We have incorporated different views, and they're turned into a series of measures mentioned in the budget of 2016-17. The views expressed in relation to plant varieties, well, we haven't really incorporated everything. We want to promote IPR, and it involves different sectors. When it comes to transaction or transfer, it involves different professional services. We hope that by expanding the scope of tax deduction, our whole economy can benefit. In relation to this proposed amendment, we do need to consult, but do we need a public hearing? Mr. Wong? Looking at the complexity of the bill, I inclined not to have a public hearing, but there will be a window period for different groups to write to us. The legal advisor advised us that we should set aside time for different bodies to give us submissions, written submissions. If there are no diverse views, then I incline not to hold any public hearing. What do you say, Mr. Poon? Our proposal will benefit different sectors. IPR expenditure that are currently chargeable will be tax deductible in the future. We have got the support of various sectors, but we'll be happy to dovetail with your work. We will collect all written submissions before the next meeting. If there are no controversies, then next time we will start with a clause by clause. Meeting adjourned, and I thank the administration and members for coming. Next meeting will take place on the 25th of May at 10:45. 25th of May, 10:45. Any questions? Thank you.